I got the engine up here on the workbench. As you can see previously, like I'm not trying to trick anybody, but I actually already did have the head all disassembled. But what I did is I just kind of hurried and threw everything back together so that you could kind of see, you know, the full disassembly from the very beginning. So spark plug remove. Then you've got 6 bolts on top here that are 12 millimeters, and each one actually has its own washer. Okay, so there's 6 12 millimeter bolts that secures your head. So remove those, and then you'll be able to pull your the top of your head off. I'll do that in a second. But so kind of one of the first things to do is, you know, pull your readout, just kind of get things out of the way, make things smaller. So there's 4 10 millimeter bolts that hold your kind of intake manifold on. So once you undo those 4 bolts, the reed assembly and the intake manifold will kind of come out all together. So now you can just set those off to the side. Okay, so again, I'm back to my 6 head bolts. I've removed those, so I can go ahead and pull the head off. Yes, I'm missing the piston. I already pulled the piston off and the wrist pin out. I'll address that in a second. So I'm going to set the head aside. I'm going to pull the head gasket off. And I've already cleaned a bunch of this up because there was a ton of, you know, oil and stuff. I think the head gasket actually was blown. So at this point, there are 4 additional nuts down in these holes, and these are also 12 millimeter bolts. They're kind of lightweight aluminum bolts, but there's one down in each corner, and these are actually where we're securing the cylinder body to the crankcase. So I recommend using a deep socket, you know, and unscrew those and pull those out of there. Set those off to the side. Now at this point, depending on how they did the gasket, the crankcase gasket at the bottom of the cylinder, you actually may have to get a dead blow hammer, which I highly recommend having one on hand. So like something like this. So a dead blow hammer is something where you can really start whacking on something and you're not actually going to, you know, damage you're not going to leave scarring marks, you know, from an actual hammer. So have a dead blow hammer available. And that should actually knock the cylinder loose. So at which point, you know, the piston is going to be in there, but you should be able to just take the cylinder head and just start lifting up, right? And it should just come right out, okay? And then the piston will be sitting there hanging in space. Hang on, I'll just set that up for you in 1 second once I safely put my cylinder body down. So the piston, you know, would be sitting in there like this. So this is what you'd be looking at. And the wrist pin for the piston, you have to actually get the wrist pin clip out, which is, so here's your wrist pin, and then here is your wrist pin clip. So the wrist pin would go in here just like this. And I don't have any oil on this whatsoever, so I'm not even going to try to push that in. So the wrist pin goes in, and then this little, I usually just use a pair of needle nose pliers with a skinny nose, and I'll reach in that little notch right there, and I'll just basically use a twisting motion to just bend the clip in towards the center, and then just pull it out, and it'll come right out. You only have to take one side out. You don't have to. There's going to be a clip on this side and on this side of the piston. You only have to take one clip out. At which point, you know, grab like a socket. I think I used a 9 millimeter socket, something that I could use to just gently just tap on the side of this wrist pin and just tap it out. And at that point, you know, piston comes off. Okay, you can set that aside. My piston, you know, I'm actually going to replace, so I'm putting that off to the side. I already have a new one, so piston, wrist pin, off to the side. Okay, so this bearing right here will come out. I'm going to leave it in there just for right now. This is the upper connecting rod bearing, I think is how they label it in the parts diagram. Okay, so that basically gets us down to just the crankcase. So from there, there's this plastic cover. There's 6 screws on this one that hold this one on. So I highly recommend that you have an impact drill to do this. So I actually use like an impact Phillips bit, and I'll show you that setup in a second. But have one of these on hand. If you actually don't have an impact driver like this on hand, then you're going to have to kind of use what they used back in the day on these Phillips machine screws, and that is where, you know, they're the ones where you have to smack it with a hammer, and when you hit them, they actually torque the screw. I've actually found that these work really good without in these impact drills work really good to not strip these machine screws. So that at this point, I'm going to move on to remove this cover. So now moving on to this cover, there are 6 of these Phillips head machine screws, right? So it's pretty self-explanatory. Just zip all of those out. And again, I use this impact driver with a Phillips bit on it. This has zero problem getting these machine screws out. You just got to kind of push, give it adequate amount of pressure, and just make sure that you've got a good sized bit that will fill the volume of the slots in the screw, right? So that you can maximize your torque. Okay, so I've taken those 6 bolts out, and so I'm just going to take this to the side. I always try to keep my hardware together, so those are the 6 bolts that go to that. So just a quick tour. So here, there's actually this is the clutch assembly. So there's just a little rod that goes down in here. You know, this is the set screw that holds that in. So once I kind of start getting into, I'm going to decide which side of the crankcase I'm going to start on. I can start on the clutch side, which is the far side from the camera, or I can start on the magneto side. I'm probably going to start on the clutch side today, so I'll flip this around because I actually don't have the puller that I need to get the magneto off, so I'm probably not going to do this side of the crankcase today. But you can see that there's a ton of cleanup that needs to happen, and so I think I'll pull off the main chain sprocket and get that soaking in a sonic bath. I'll get the shifter arm off. I'm just going to try to kind of clean this up and get some of this off. I'm obviously not going to film that part. You guys don't. It's just cleaning grease. Once I pull the magneto off, though, I'll have where the points are, and once I'm able to remove the points, I can pull actually the wires. Anything that's a wire here, I'll be able to pull out and kind of just set off to the side. So I think I'm going to save that just for tomorrow or the next day, just to when I can get my my wheel puller. So that said, right now I'm going to remove this. And then once I remove this and the shifter arm, I'll move to the other side and we'll open up the clutch side of the crankcase. Backed out. I'm just going to quickly zip off this this magneto nut. So it's a 19 millimeter. Okay. Super easy with an impact wrench. So if you didn't have an impact wrench, you'd be like, it'd be almost easier to do this with the motor. Either you need some type of bench mount for the motor, or you would need to put it back in the motorcycle, or do this, you know, before you take it out of the motorcycle, because you're gonna have to like hold it in place. I'm just telling you, like, this is just so much easier to do it this way. Look how easy that was. So path of least resistance. So I actually have a couple of other wheel pullers that I'm going to experiment with here for a second and see if I can't pull this off, because if I can just kind of stay and keep with kind of tearing down this side of the motor, that's what I'd rather do. So I'm going to get some of my other pullers out here and see if I can. There's actually an official Yamaha puller, and I'll put the flashlight on the screen right now. It's in the service manual. This image is actually from the service manual, and this is the one that they use to. This is the factory tool, I guess you could say, but I'm going to see what else I got. Now I can just, we're going to pop open the clutch side of the crankcase here. So there's a couple of screws here. So I'm just going to go around and use my impact wrench, right, on each one. And actually, we'll do kind of a real-time experiment so I can put my money where my mouth is. And I'm just going to kind of show you that these impact wrenches actually work pretty good. I gotta hold the engine in place. Let's see if I can get a good shot on that. So if you just let it hit once or twice, it'll actually jostle all of them loose. So, but you do have to, it's hard to hold the thing. I got to get a hand on the crankcase here so I can actually, I have to push in, you know, so that it gets a good grip. So here we go. Okay, so hopefully that's a good demo. But these actually work really good versus the factory impact torques that are manual. See if I can, I'll just put an image of that on the screen real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. But this is what they use at the factory and what they used back in, you know, 1980, 1978, in the 70s, 80s, when they were, before they had these nifty hand drills. Thing to be aware of is once you get all the screws out, there actually is this spacer for the Kickstarter. So take that off, set it aside, and then there's also going to be an oil seal here that you're probably going to want to replace. There's a washer first, and then an oil seal that you're going to want to replace. It's a really thin washer that goes up against that oil seal. So I'm going to replace that one because there's oil all over the engine. So again, like just like on the driving crank for the chain on the other side, I think that one was leaking worse than this one, but this one is obviously leaking. So all these seals are going to get replaced.